Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Global AI podcast. And I've just been reminded of the fact that it's our 1 year anniversary. I actually can't, for the life of me, believe that we're already at episode 12. It really has been kicking along really, really well. So, welcome back if you've been here before. If you haven't, my name is Akancha, one of the hosts here at the podcast. I'm an AI MVP here in Melbourne, and I'll introduce you to our co host here, Arafat.
Hello everyone, I'm Arafat. I'm also an AI MVP based in Sydney, and we would like to welcome Ross. Ross, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, I'm Ross. I'm a digital accessibility individual, and I run a company called Canaxis, which is web and digital accessibility focused.
Perfect. And our episode today is all about accessibility, which is a really big part of what Ross is about and what you do. And I've seen a lot of stuff that you talk about on LinkedIn around it. I guess, I mean, I definitely am a really big fan. I really appreciate the fact that it's becoming so much bigger, especially around AI. And do you want to maybe go through exactly why it's so important to bring that in and kind of get everyone else on board as well?
I guess nowadays it's a business recognizing that to compete in a very busy marketplace, there needs to be a differentiator. So many banks and retail businesses are already putting a huge amount of effort into making up a really good user experience, but factoring in people with disabilities means that you can reach ever larger number of users. So, for example, in the UK is the Purple Pound initiative, which highlights the spending power of the disabled community, where 1 in 5 have a disability. 73% of a potential disabled the customers experience barriers on more than a quarter of websites, and some £2 billion a month is lost by business ignoring the needs of disabled people. So traditionally, the message has been about helping disabled users access critical services and infrastructure online. That's still there, but now it's like the business communities recognizing that they need to differentiate themselves, and what a better way than making up their digital service or a digital product accessible for ever more larger number of users. So traditionally, it's been purely altruistic of helping the disabled people. Now, though, that message has moved from helping them to ultimately furthering a business imperative. So making more money by providing a better user experience of for everyone, regardless of impairments. And that's the main motivator now, I believe.
Cool. Yeah, we as you talked about, multiple businesses verticals are investing too much into the user experience just to bring in better features for and handy features for everyone. And we have seen that there has been significant development ever since the industry has started and started has and they have started leveraging the power of AI in different departments. Now, as we are the AI podcast, so we would like to start with this question with you, that can AI be used as the complementary aid for improving the user experience on all of these websites, apps, or the solutions those that businesses are coming up with, the one which you have spoken about specifically?
I believe it can, but it's important recognizing that AI is still in its infancy. So rather than being this technology which can be rapidly applied and it would make a website much more usable, it needs to be used in much more much more targeted way. So, for example, Microsoft Azure has the Immersive Reader tool, which is a tool which helps users with lower levels of literacy. It can read text aloud, translate, and display pictures for words. So, if a user is having a difficulty communicating, there's this a complementary mechanism there which can help a user overcome their difficulties. But I guess it's recognizing that at the moment it's not matured enough that it can just be rapidly unleashed. It needs to basically operate in a walled garden and within a certain parameters. So AI at the moment is very, very good for pattern matching. That's where it could be used to its fullest. And as the technology matures and gets better and better, then there might be additional opportunities of making a user experience better. But at this stage, it's that healthy healthy recognition, I guess, that whilst it's really, really good in a certain situations, it's not a panacea for every challenge a user face. It needs to be used in targeted ways, basically playing up to its strength.
Yeah, I agree with you. And considering immersive reader, as you have given an example of, I think it is too cool for so many things. But I would love to know, first of all, what do you think that it is lacking behind in, and if it is not, then what others can do as well. So if I just go with you on this question, that what do you think that Azure Immersive Reader is not good at, if I would ask?
Interesting question. What's it not good at? I guess it's understanding a context. So if it's fed a passage of a text, it can highlight nouns, verbs, and adjectives, and also replace words with pictures for that read aloud capability. But there's no real understanding of context, so it just seems to be at the moment treating passages of text as individual items of words as opposed to a narrative. So it's I guess missing out on on being able to infer a context. So it's very, very good at in individual words, so verbs and nouns, but not so much of describing what the text means, and that's where it's lacking at the moment. As for what benefit that might add to a user, I'm not sure. Would a user need to understand the background a passage of a text, or is it much more convenient that it just highlights individual words and replaces pictures? It's that unknown where there's an opportunity there, but I'm not sure what opportunity that could really solve.
I think that's a fair point. I think it comes back down to that part of trying to predict that future, especially when it's user stuff, right? When it's every single person will have a different input on what they want to see and how they want to improve it. I guess on the other end of it is how can we make things easier for the from a developer point of view, of when we're actually doing things online and things like that, for screen readers to make things accessible in that end of things when we're using the internet and we're using all the different kind of capabilities and stuff to share whatever we might be.
This is a really interesting question, because one of the challenges nowadays with developers is that they need to understand so much now. So security, performance, accessibility, UX, UI. Is it acceptable that a developer doesn't know about accessibility and reaches out for an individual who does, or should they shoulder a lot more of that responsibility? As I guess it's a jack of all trades or a master of none. If your main development role is writing in a .NET, then is there that expectation that you're also a whiz with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? All of those technologies alone are very, very in depth. So if there were to be an opportunity of leveraging AI in some way that it could help a user whilst development, so much like VS Codes in telesense, so that a prediction of what a developer might be wanting. So linting the code with checkers saying you've missed this, you might need to add that. There's an opportunity there of having it recommend things to add, but ultimately there needs to be a user who is expert in that discipline to say, you've used an ARIA label here, but you don't need to, or you've used a button there, but you need to use a link. Because so much like with Immersive Reader, it's that a context again which matters. So even though it may recommend adding extra attributes or extra elements, it needs that understanding that whilst you may be able to take all the recommendations from the AI engine, you might still be making something really, really poor. So it's that recognition, I guess, that it has a niche and it's very, very good in that niche, but outside of that, it begins to get less effective.
That's correct. And now coming to the developers part again, since we are revolving around them. So, if, as Akansha mentioned that, and she asked about the question about how can they make such a content? Is there any silver bullet? And we got to know that no, there is no silver bullet. But are there any toolkit available which can drive those development in a way that it can become easier, if not perfect, for developers to embed or to transform that content which is not accessible in a way that it becomes a little accessible, or not little, in fact, enough accessible so that it can be accessed by, I would say, more than 70% of those who are not able to access, by just by embedding a immersive reader. It helps developers or readers as well, with people with the with the with all kind of abilities. So now, is there any other toolkit which can help us, or toolkits which can help us to drive these accessibilities?
Very much so. Yeah. There's several well-known browser extensions. One of the most popular is Wave, WAVE, which is this browser extension which can highlight on a page per page basis missing headings, images which are missing alt attributes, and also a color contrast issues. So it's very, very, very good at finding things which are syntactic errors, things which are consistent to find. An image is missing this attribute. I find it and indicate to the developer, you need to add this attribute there. So that works very well. But as you go down the development path, there's also a build tools which you can add in to the build pipeline. So one of the most popular is Axe Core, so AXE CORE. That's this accessibility testing engine made by a large accessibility vendor, where you can write your test cases, and it will announce errors in real time. So basically a test-driven accessibility development. So rather than waiting till an applications are being built and then testing it with this build tool, it's much easier to find those low hanging fruits earlier on. So things like missing headings, color contrast, or missing attributes. These are the very easy accessibility issues which can be rapidly identified and rapidly caught. But traditionally in the web accessibility area, websites are pretty easy to make accessible if you follow the appropriate guidelines. When you're making a web application, there's a lot more complex interactivity involved. So even though these linters and checkers would find easy problems, as you're working at building a web application, it then means that remaining issues rely on an expert reviewer to sort of manually go through a page. So yes, there is build tools which work in the development pipeline, but they only get so far. So traditionally 30 to 40% of all the accessibility issues found are with automated tools. Then you move in to the manual review, where an expert reviewer just looks at the HTML code and the interaction modes in depth.
That's pretty cool. And I think from a non-developer person to notice, it's interesting that the percentage is so low in terms of what it does pick up very quickly. Definitely a lot more work to go. But I guess, there is so much more investment going into this kind of stuff at the moment. But I think pivoting away from that point of view a little bit and kind of moving towards, hopefully, at least in Australia, we can come back into in-person events soon enough. But kind of talking about events and meetups, and they kind of, you can move those into kind of meetings and actual interpersonal conversations and things happening in an office as well. But how can we make those kind of things a lot more accessible? Like, what can we do to make those really, really comfortable? And this can be anything from like the small little parts all the way to the really big things, that like, whether that be speech to text or just making sure there's seating available. Like, there's so many different parts of it, but like, yeah, maybe you want to take it, whichever end of it you want to take.
I guess it's just recognizing it's not a one size fits all approach. So whilst there may be accommodations which may help a visually impaired user, it may not help a deaf user. So it's recognizing that you can always add those accommodations. You could have captions on your video, but then acknowledge that also captions may not always be useful if there's a lot of background noise. You could have in person signers signing. You can have lots and lots of assistance there, but one of the best things I found is just acknowledging that there will be gaps, that there will be individuals who, no matter your best intentions, they will have difficulty. either using their online tools or attending in a person. And I guess it's being honest enough to recognise that we've done so much, and we want to open it up to everyone, but there will be challenges there with some users. If that's you, reach out. So having that clear communication where you acknowledge you've put a lot of hard work into making it accessible, either in a person or online, but also acknowledging that if you are having difficulties, please reach out. And I've found it's that humbleness of attitude. So rather than saying we've used AI and it works 100% of the time, because there's bound to be an individual or individuals who say, well, that is wonderful for everyone else, but I have a really challenging difficulty. So it's just being humble enough of saying we've done a lot to make it inclusive, but we know we can do more. And I think it's that attitude of acknowledging that.
I think that's fair. And I think it lends itself a bit into the part of building a community that's safe and feels like someone can approach you to say, hey, I'm not comfortable here. And that goes a long way, whether or not it is already accessible, but at least making a space for it to be able to say that, hey, this isn't, and this is how we can make it better. I think it goes such a long way. And there's definitely so much work to be done around it. But I'm glad at least we're bringing highlights into it to make things a little bit better.
Exactly right, yes.
I think the other, like, kind of moving from this this is more the community part of it, but like looking towards enterprise level, I guess, across the giants, right? I mean, Microsoft, IBM, like all these places they're working, like they are starting to do so much more for accessibility and using AI for accessibility at the moment. I can be seeing like it's a real push coming in through those things. But I mean, how much do you really think that's going to be the need? Like, is it really going to be hey, we need individuals to push this forward, or is it going to be corporations pushing this forward? Where do you see this going, I guess, in the next couple of years? Or is it going to be a mix of everything?
Interesting, because with accessibility, it seems like it's been very much a grassroots-led initiative where traditionally it's been from the accessibility advocates who've been pushing it a lot, and then government gets involved and they then mandate that accessibility guidelines have to be met. And then I guess on the one side, those larger organizations working for government recognize that governments mandated that all of their websites must be accessible. So therefore, we must also ensure our capabilities up there. And I guess it's been from the community highlighting inaccessibility, which has then driven government and larger organizations to focus on it. Where there's a gap still, it is those medium-sized enterprises where it's always viewed as a costly endeavor, that making a website takes time and effort. But if they're investing in making a user experience better, then obviously accessibility falls in to that space. So it's come from multiple angles. Traditionally, developers have been pushing it, viewing it, I guess, as a badge of honor and recognition that they've been able to make a website accessible. That's then filtered up with disability laws where governments mandated accessibility for their own websites, and then contracts for larger organizations working for governments must also be accessible. So in many ways, a government's been the driver for the larger organizations to really sort of get their act together and make a better user experiences. But also, conversely, with banks and larger insurers, they recognise that opening up their digital services for more users is just a much better business decision. If they can work with more users, then obviously it's much more business for them.
And I think I mean, it kind of lines up with what you were talking about businesses at the start, right? Where they're finally seeing the fact that they're missing out on such a big market. And they're like, oh, we got to get into this. Not because it's the right thing, because, hey, there's money here and the whole carrot stick thing. But at the end of, I mean, yes, as much as we want everyone to do this out of their own good hearts, and they're like, yes, okay, let's make this a better world. At least we're doing it, whether it's being forced into it through governments and like business profits or whichever it is. I'm glad at least like there is still things happening in that case. And I guess, yeah, it's all working out, I guess, a little bit, bit by bit.
Exactly. And I guess it's hard not to be cynical when a larger organization is active in the accessibility area, but look at what they've done and not necessarily why they're doing it. If they've been able to make all of their digital products accessible, then really that's what we want. Even though there may be this very hard business attitude behind it, it's ultimately a good outcome for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's correct. But if you are talking about the enterprise and the community side, and you have also spoken about the small business enterprises where or small businesses who are doing mostly work around websites or web portals, and because of the investments within those small houses or startups, they do not tend to go towards or they don't touch all the points of accessibility. So there's a part there is a challenge over there right now. But do you think that there will be a time or when where we will see majority of the applications or solutions transformed with accessibility features? But as someone who has been looking at this part of industry for so long.
I'd love to say yes, but knowing the web digital landscape, there's mum and dad corner shops who build a website with, say, Wix. Is it acceptable that they need to understand accessibility? Some might say yes, some might say no. So ultimately, if they don't have an accessible website, they're in breach of the Disability Discrimination Act. Should they know about that? Possibly yes, because if you're running a business, you need to be aware of many rules and obligations, and one of that is non-discriminatory. So on the one hand, they ought to make their website or a digital service accessible, but in the real world, will it happen? I don't know, because there's they're obviously have limited means, and they would use a website a builder, which means that the accessibility initiative has now been moved up to them, where if you're having an option for individuals to make websites easy, then a business opportunity for them would be ensuring that any website made up is accessible. So it's multiple layers where the business owner is at risk of legal action, however minor it is, and they might need to make better decisions regarding their digital infrastructure. So rather than building a website with Wix, it may mean in the long term they need to custom build. So it's very, very difficult. You're saying business must have an accessible website, as it doesn't really address the real world challenges, but it's at least acknowledging that if you don't have a website, you may be in breach of the Disability Discrimination Act. But ultimately, it comes back to good communication, that if a business owner thinks it's a risk, then at least have a mechanism on their website saying, if you are having difficulties, reach out. So it's having that mechanism there where if a user is having difficulties, they can reach out and get assistance. One of the most famous articles of an inaccessible website, though, was with the supermarket chain Coles. Several years back, a vision impaired woman was attempting to order online, and her requests for assistance never really helped much with the overall experience. Reluctantly, it then escalated to the Human Rights Commission, and then eventually legal action began, with Coles settling out of court and fixing their websites. So from this very challenging issue with accessibility earlier on, Coles are now one of the leaders of having a website which has really, really good digital accessibility. But all of that legal action, I guess, could have been avoided if you had an upfront message saying, whilst we recognise there might be challenges, if you are having difficulties, reach out. And so it's just having that message that yes, the website might be inaccessible, but we want to make sure that you as a customer can use it. So if you are having difficulties, reach out or email us. And that would go a long way to build consumer confidence, that if I, as a disabled user, I can't use a website, I at least have a mechanism there to contact the business and say, hey, this is bad, I need help. And that means a lot, I think.
I think that's really, really interesting. I mean, it's given me a lot to think about. And I mean, I get a good question here would be, is the onus, especially when we're talking about the kind of small businesses and like the family-owned businesses and stuff, is the onus on Squarespace and Wix and WordPress to actually build the templates from the beginning to be accessible, I wonder? Because like, I mean, I have a Squarespace website, and as much as of work I'm doing around making everything else accessible, I haven't even thought about the fact that my website might not be accessible to begin with, because I'm trying to make everything else accessible. And that's such an interesting point. And because the whole concept of that is just put your content on there and it's good to go. I mean, I feel like it's just not going to be such a big part of a thinking process, of a checklist of things to make sure that's on there, because the premise that they're putting ahead of you is it's good to go and you can get it on there in 2 minutes. So what, like, is the onus then falling back onto them to make sure their kind of foundation level is already accessible.
I guess so. Yes. Yeah. Where at the moment Wix and WordPress are factoring in accessibility and are doing well, but it's maybe not being applied matter of fact. Maybe it's an optional extra that a user has to ask for. So maybe it needs to be baked in, I guess, that when any template's used, you're not using a template which is accessible. It's every template is accessible. So it's so matter of the fact that you just assume that I'm using Wix. Wix has a really good accessibility policy. They've done a lot of research, and knowing that I, as a business owner, can use that, and I've reduced my legal risk. So at the moment, Wix and WordPress operate in the area of having accessibility policies, but it may be tokenistic where they may have done the bare minimum, but they've not necessarily got accessibility experts looking over every a template saying this is wrong and this needs to be moved and this needs to be made heading. So whilst they've got accessibility policies, and from what I understand are doing really well in making their templates accessible, it feels like it's adding on accessibility right at the endpoint, as opposed to ensuring every single template has all those key accessibility attributes. So not to be cynical, they're doing well, but is there an opportunity to do better? Of course, but equally they are factoring in accessibility, and I guess it's recognizing that accessibility is a journey as such and not a fast run. So it's to do more and add more to make the experience better.
Absolutely. I like your quote when you say that it's a journey, not the fast run. So yeah, and we all can relate with this conversation as well. And there are so many things in my mind, and I'm sure in Akansha's as well. But we really need to close this. So I'll ask you the last question. And so, what do you think are the top three ways, or two ways, or just top way to that AI can help transform this accessibility part? Would it be a translation, image recognition, or any other way AI can help make all of these solutions better?
I think my number one would be image recognition. So already AI does a really good job of describing simple images, but what's missing is a context. So if you had an image of a boat on say Sydney Harbour, the AI may identify it's a boat on water, but it's missing that context, that richer meaning, which uh, you get when you look at an image visually. So it's missing it's a sunny day. It's missing that it's sailing under the bridge. There are many other boats on the water. All of that extra background imagery isn't necessarily conveyed. So whilst a user who is visually impaired may have a description of boat on water, life is quite miserable if all you're ever hearing are literal descriptions of images. So if you had AI look at, say, Mona Lisa, woman looking back with a indifferent face, it's not really capturing what an image is conveying. And I think for AI, the next part is that a context with image recognition, not just explaining what's in an image or what's in a photo, but explaining it in a way of this is relevant because of X, Y, and Z. There's this extra noise around an image. And I think that's the next major thing in AI, a contextual understanding, making visual images and visual UI understood in a much more richer way.
And I think, honestly, what a great way to wrap everything up today. It just makes so much more sense, and I think we're real. And it kind of comes back to the whole it's a journey, not like a sprint, like as it is, and we're building towards it. Okay, great, we've got these images that we can say what's happening, but like let's put context around it. Let's make this better. Let's keep going. And I really enjoy that part, and I love kind of all accessibility kind of conversations like this in the first place, because it feels like it makes me think about my life a little bit more. I'm like, wait, what can I do better? And I think I really appreciate that part. So hopefully someone listening today, they can also have a little think back through their own life and see where they can make a little bit more of an accessibility part of change going forward. But thank you so much for your time, Ross. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been wonderful, folks. Loved it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Right. We will be back again. I'm assuming in a month, but it is Christmas, so we'll see. But we'll be back. We're going to stick to our monthly update schedule, and I hope everyone takes care of themselves. And hey, make at least one little accessibility change in your life. I'm sure you'll be thankful for it.